Well, that's the bell, and class is in session once again for this week's episode of the Apartment Academy, the multifamily industry's only operations-focused podcast and your Institute of Higher NOI. I'm your host, the Dean of the Apartment Academy, Daniel Cunningham, and today's guest lecturer is Tony Sousa. Tony is Vice President of Market Relations for RPM Living, and in that capacity, Tony is in charge of helping to build the RPM brand, build the business. He is their external and internal proselytizer. And so we talked today about what are the components of a great brand? What makes a great property management brand, really starting from the operations side. So Tony's going to talk today about the operations aspects that he thinks about as he's trying to grow that company's business. And he's got some great things to share. So let's bring on Professor Sousa. Welcome, Professor Sousa. Class is in session here at the stately Classroom 101 lecture hall at the Apartment Academy. Glad you could make it.
Oh, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Tony, I always like to talk a little bit about just the journey that people take to come into multifamily, because it's always, there's a common thread, which is usually, I didn't mean to be here. And it's always interesting to see how people get to that point. So tell us a little bit about you. You have had a unusual kind of path to get here as well. I thought that's kind of cool. You can talk about it for 2 seconds, and we'll talk about what you're up to.
Yeah, most people just sort of stumble into this industry, and then interesting enough, most don't leave. So same for me. I stumbled into it. I was an actor in Los Angeles and thought I could rent an apartment and save some money on rent. And those two factors, I was getting married in 10 months, and I needed to save some money for the wedding, and I could lease apartments. And so I jumped right in. They didn't show up for my first two interviews, my hiring manager, but ultimately on the third one, they took a chance on me, and it's worked out well. I think it worked out well for them at the time, and it's worked out well for me. So that was a long time ago, but just grateful to be in a great industry that really, I think, supports growth and their people, and I think we all love this industry for a lot of the same reasons.
What sort of roles have you, ever since your leasing agent days, what sort of other roles have you held?
So I've worked my way up and through ops. So leasing, assistant manager, spent some time as a regional marketing, training, and social media manager as well. Of course, as a regional manager, vice president of operations as well. So I've had the good pleasure of being able to work really at every level and every position for a notable amount of time to learn everything I possibly can about that position. So, as a leader, that really helps me understand the challenges of every position and ultimately how they all work together, ideally on paper and in real life.
Yeah, so that's, I think, interesting for listeners to know that you have this very strong operational background, that you really came up through the ranks. I think that's really important. A lot of street cred comes along with that. But now you're vice president of market relations at RPM.
Yeah, so exciting new role. And so kind of breaking news, depending on when this airs per se. But vice president of operations now into a vice president of marketing relations. What is vice president of marketing relations with RPM? Well, it's a lot of things, but ultimately it's the company's brand ambassador and ultimately the national spokesperson for RPM. So I'm excited about that. What does that entail? Like I said, it is a lot of things, obviously a lot of things media, a lot of things communications or comms, and both internally and externally. Internally, interacting and working with our current employee base across the country, helping them understand new rollouts and different initiatives that we have, as well as externally, bringing in, visibility and helping, bring in new business, of course, as well as really kind of attracting top talent throughout the country. So really excited to be in this new role. It's definitely a different role in multifamily. I don't think there's a lot of sort of spokesperson's roles, but I do think it merges my skill set of operations and my ability to communicate very well. And so I just feel privileged to be in this opportunity.
You're right about that. There's not a ton. I mean, you'll bump into maybe an industry principal from time to time, business development, but they are rare, but more common in sort of more highly evolved, larger operators like RPM. And I think it's sort of a harbinger of a greater level of professionalization in the property management industry more broadly, It's an indicator that the industry is maturing, and this idea that you don't just necessarily grow by word of mouth all the time, or there is a process that you go by. You talk about your external responsibilities to help grow the business. There's a process you now go through to be included in RFPs and promote the brand. And the idea of brand actually itself is sort of, it used to be like, well, people like us, we're good people, but now there are companies cultivating a distinct brand, and you are at the center of that there at RPM. And what I thought would be interesting today is to hear, since you have the operations side, is to hear how like operations and the quality of operations and what you do, what the RPM way translates into brand, which then translates into customers wanting to come and have you manage as a third-party manager for them. So let's start out a little bit there, Tony, with talking just about your thesis about what the brand means and how that relates to operations.
Well, it's interesting because although in sort of a brand management type role, marketing role now, I came from the other side of the spectrum. I think a lot of people usually on the marketing side or brand side usually come from a quintessential marketing background, a fundamental marketing background. I came from operations side, so I almost came from it. I've sort of backed into it, if you will. And I think ultimately, I think a brand is only as strong as the deliverables or the operations that it delivers at the end of the day. And that's probably showing some of my operational bias, maybe. But ultimately, I liken it to a restaurant. I think we understand some great restaurants. They have a great brand or reputation, or seem like a great place to go take your family or enjoy on an evening. But we all know if the ambiance and the experience was great, but the food was terrible, you probably won't go back. You maybe go back a second time just to give the food another shot, but 2 times, maybe 3 times, 3 strikes, you're out, right? So if the food quality is not where it needs to be, then you're not going to come back to that restaurant. I liken it very similarly to our industry when it comes to operations. And a brand is a big thing. It's a brand internally to employees, what they feel and believe about the company they currently work for, as well as we have residents who essentially are our customers, and so they understand this brand, both sort of hyper-local and national brand, the RPM brand, but of course the property brand, if you will. And so, depending on how well of a job we've done both nationally and locally, you're going to get prospects that come through your doors and want to have that experience, both from a sales standpoint, but ultimately if they decide to live there, they want to believe everything they've read through the marketing collateral or the branding is true. And if that does not come true, or there's some sort of variable or delta between the experience that they had initially and their day-to-day living experience, they're unhappy at the end of the day. So in my opinion, again, this may be showing some of my operational bias, that if operations aren't your central focus to make sure that they're streamlined and well executed, your brand is not as strong as it would be if your operations are as strong as they can be. And here at RPM, I think that's our main focus, although we do an incredible job of branding nationally and locally for our properties. The focus is delivering and executing at a very high level in all ways from an operational standpoint. We understand our business. We understand that we cater to both clients, but more specifically to residents. And to be able to execute at a high level in a lot of different ways operationally for our residents is key to growing our brand. So
I'm going to stick with your restaurant analogy, which I think feels apropos. So the food that you're delivering, the operations experience you're delivering, in the back is the kitchen with people furiously preparing that food, right? And you talked about, I just wrote some notes, so you talk about an operation that's streamlined, efficient, operating at a high level. Walk us through, Tony, having been on the operations side, what first of all, what's hard about being streamlined and efficient in this industry, and why doesn't everyone operate at a high level? Like, what prevents people from doing that? What's difficult?
It's a great question, Daniel. What's hard about being streamlined? I think most industries have a challenge with that. Our industry has the biggest challenge because there's 1,000 moving parts, right? I've always said the science of our business and the biggest challenge isn't that our business is rocket science. The challenge of our business, and those who are great at it and the companies that are phenomenal at it, can handle and juggle 1,000 balls at once, right? And so there's a lot of moving parts in multifamily, maybe different than other industries, because you have a lot of sort of internal, external customers that you're trying to please. You have your employees that you're trying to take care of, and making sure that they're well trained, educated on processes and services. And then, of course, you have residents. You have this whole huge demographic and number of customers, which are our residents, that need to understand the functionality of online portals and how to put in a maintenance work order and how to get a package. I mean, there's just a lot of moving parts all the time. And I think the variable that just makes it that much more challenging for our business is there's a lot of new technologies that are out there that are starting to be implemented in our industry more and more as our industry continues to sophisticate. It just adds a whole nother layer of training, innovation, and at the end of the day, execution of new processes, new technologies, and all of those moving parts happening all in real time while someone's AC is not working. That's the trick of the trade. And those companies that do an incredible job of that, like RPM, obviously there's others out there as well, that really kind of have their processes tied together tightly, as well as their communication down to the site teams, and giving them the tools and support that they need so that they can take care of the customers at the end of the day.
So you mentioned training. It was forefront in your mind of giving people training, and that tied into also training on new technology, which I'm definitely familiar with that, with wearing my other hat on the Leonardo 24/7 side of the world. But let's start with training then. How do you implement it, especially across a large organization like RPM? By the way, it probably behooves us to take 2 seconds, Tony, and give some sense of the scope of RPM so people know kind of the operations that we're talking about here.
Yeah, so I mean, we're approaching upwards to 200,000 units across the country. So it's exciting, but at the same time, that level of scale, presents a notable challenge that we have a lot of executive leaders and mid-level leaders really have to be fully bought in and locked in to make sure to execute at that high level. So, but those top 5, top 10 operators in the country, all have the same challenge. It's the challenge of scale and ultimately delivering nuanced and detailed, customized, couteured service to your resident at the end of the day.
All right, so 200,000 units. How do you provide training, or how do you effectuate consistency of operations across that many units?
Yeah, well, obviously as an operator, I could speak from the operations side. Obviously there's experienced trainers that understand how to unpack this, and then of course teach adults how to execute on policies or procedures. But ultimately, I think it starts with a vision, right? It starts with sort of a culture and a vision of what we want to be able to execute on the ground. And then it's passed along to quite a few different departments, but ultimately L&D here at RPM is responsible for the learning and development, and ultimately teaching and training our site team members and mid-level corporate operators what the expectations are, what the resources are, and what resources are available to them, and what resources are available to them to learn and then execute on the ground. So I mean, it takes an army, as you well know, especially at this scale, to be able to sort of work succinctly and in harmoniously to execute, at the end of the day for our residents. And so you really, and it also, I think RPM is really kind of taking a look at how people learn. I think we learned a lot through the pandemic about how people learn. I think there's been a lot of shift to just online learning, which I think that's a helpful piece to the learning process. I think in different ways we're bringing back sort of in-person workshops in different ways for different courses, leadership courses and other. So just finding, really at the end of the day, what works best for certain associates and certain, status of associates at different levels, and how can they best execute on the policies and procedures that we currently have in place. It's no small task. Let me just say that.
Yeah. You have the front end of this task, which is how do you communicate consistently all these policies and procedures across a growing portfolio where the industry, I don't know how well or how much RPM suffers from this, but the industry in general has a high turnover rate, so that training is it constantly has to be happening. So you have that part, and then you've got the sort of the follow up to that, like KPIs, or I don't know how you hold people accountable for those things, but you've got to measure those things that you train people on. You probably communicate at some level those things to clients, so they've got some visibility in what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, we do that very frequently and very often. We think visibility and transparency of those KPIs are key to the relationships that we can continue to strengthen with our clients. And at the end of the day, they also help us, hold ourselves accountable, at a property level, regional level, portfolio level. Those clients remind us often, of course, what those KPIs are, and if we're meeting them, of course, if we're not. So.
Okay, the second thing that was on your mind when you were talking about operations was the resident experience. And there were a couple. You talked about portals. You talked about how you enter work orders. What is a when you're operating at a high level? What's a high level of resident experience these days? What's that suite look like of services and things that you provide to residents?
Well, I think our industry has fallen in love with, over the last couple of years, with how many different services and technologies can we offer a resident. I'm of the belief, and I think RPM is the key, I think, to a great resident experience, is to simplify the experience, and to be able to sort of provide them what they want in an incredibly timely fashion, whether it be update on their renewal or access to an amenity, and make sure the technology and the functionality is working. We have to remember that everybody is inside their own heads 24 hours a day, and so being able to provide them the resources that they need in a timely fashion. And when I say a timely fashion, I think today's timely fashion is not 24 hours, right? It's 2 hours or less, give or take. And so how do we streamline those communications to make sure that residents' requests, whether it be work orders or questions about their lease, is streamlined to the right person? Can it be, I think where our industry, an exciting, next adventure for our industry, is how to utilize, machine learning as well as, artificial intelligence, AI as we know it, and how can we expedite feedback to the residents in a way that feels still very personalized and not computerized. I think today's customer very quickly knows if a computer responded to them or a human responded to them, frankly. And I think, in time, I think that line is going to blur some. And so I think, us as a company, I know that we're sort of looking at a lot of different technologies to figure out how it can support our site teams, and ultimately, at the end of the day, support our residents to get the services and requests they request or need done or completed in a really timely fashion.
Do you mind if I go off on one slight tangent here, which if we think it's boring, we can edit out later, which is, do you think, I think it's interesting what you just said, like, how can AI facilitate this near real-time or absolutely real-time interface with residents and providing them information that they want? Do you think that the new generation of resident is more accepting of the fact that, hey, I may not be talking to a real person, but I'm getting the information that I want in an accurate and an efficient way? I'm not getting frustrated because I'm, it says, if you wanna book a ticket to Wisconsin, press 1. Like, no, I want to pay my rent. If they're having an experience that's fluid and is responsive, do you think they mind that they know that they're talking to a machine? Like, is it necessary to mask the AI in order for it to be useful?
I would say today, I mean, it's a pretty sort of robust question, and I think it has much to do with really kind of demographic. I think, what we'll call Gen Z or millennial demographic, if that's the primary demographic at your particular submarket or at your community, I think is more open to interacting with the technology because they sort of grew up in this environment, in this culture, to where, listen, I'm not sure if I'm talking to a person or a bot, if you will, But I don't really care as long as I'm getting what I need to get. Now I think probably Gen X or older Boomer is high expectation of human interaction. So, but I think the question is really sort of current and for the future, which will be continually millennial demographic, Gen Z, and then what is it, Gen Alpha? I don't know. Do they care as long as they're getting what they need? I think in time they will not care, or they will care less. I think today, I think they still want an interaction with some level of human touch, or perceived belief that there is a human overseeing this bot, just to make sure if things go rogue or they're not delivering the service or the technology request that they need, that there's somebody that can sort of insert themselves. I liken it, top of mind right now, an analogy that comes to mind is a pilot flying a plane. For the most part, I think we all understand that GPS and the plane machine technology is flying most of your flight, up until things get bumpy or things go off the radar or GPS sort of falters. I think we all want to know in that plane aircraft that we have a pilot or two in there that can take control of the situation and get us to where we need to be. I think it's the same for some of this newer technology, that I think we want to believe that there's still some human oversight that can get us to the proverbial landing pad, if you will, to execute on our request.
Yeah, cool. I think it's a very fascinating, evolving field of innovation within multifamily, and since you touched on it.
It is, and and a lot of conversations around, is this going to take my job? And I think years ago I used to be very confident to say absolutely it won't. I think with the advances of technology and what the pandemic has done for our industry, and I think all industries in a lot of ways, has really automated a lot of this experience. And so I just encourage anyone listening here to really understand the technology and learn how they could add value to the emerging technology versus continuing to learn a skill set that could be automated. If that continues in a way that it seems it will be, jobs may be in jeopardy ultimately.
Yeah. Yes. And it opens up the opportunities for a different. There's a lot of talk about this with relation to centralization, right? And so there is a lot of talk about, well, there is a new kind of role that may be emerging that is more resident focused, less administrative, like as AI takes over more of the administrative, setting appointments, giving tours, and there's more of a concierge role that might be emerging. So is there anything on the horizon for RPM that you guys are looking at in terms of the next wave of technology or the way to provide services or anything like that would be interesting to share?
Yeah, I mean, with how large we are, we have sort of a team internally, analytic team, as well as a research and development team, technology team that's really out there looking at all technologies that are available to us, and even outside industries as well. There's probably not too much that I can sort of unveil or disclose here per se, but the reality is we're taking a look at all of them to remain as competitive as we can in the marketplace with multifamily providers. And a lot of this, I think uniquely to our business, has much to do with submarket. I think submarket dictates a lot of the technology that's implemented, type of property from a Class A, Class B, Class C, value add asset. And of course the demographic that resides at each one of those types of properties, as well as in that submarket, is key. So there's a lot of nuance to that. And like I said, categorically, your big cities, urban cities, yes, they're going to be probably more advanced when it comes to implementing new technologies versus maybe some of your suburban parts of the country, in more of your garden style or older communities as well. So I think that is the fascination and the nuance of our industry, and probably why we continue to be drawn into this industry, and why we love it so much, because there's just so many details and so much nuance to our industry. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think most of us, why we're in this business is for the people part. And so I think, even at high levels, I think we're wrestling with technology and people, and how they can complement one another. And I think that's ideally how we pave, a successful road forward between technology and people.
Is there, Tony, a distinctive profile of an RPM employee? If people are that important, is there anything that RPM looks for in particular in selecting community managers, service? Is there a common thread amongst all of that?
Yeah, I mean, once you get past experience and resume and have you worked on this type of asset and what have you done, I think a core driver for us is we're looking for people with high levels of character. It's a core value of ours internally that we talk about being a good human. And what does that mean? And that means a lot of different things to a lot of people, but it means a lot to us that you are a good human, that you have good character, that you think about your teammates and your residents in a way that they are humans. It's not just a business. And so I know when I'm looking at candidates, and I know when RPM across the national spectrum are looking at candidates, is, can you do the job? Sure. Yes or no, check, or not a check. But if we determine you can do the job, are you going to be a value add to the culture of good people that are supportive and ambitious and kind, all of those things. And I think it speaks to what you mentioned earlier. AI and some of these other technologies may be able to automate some things in the future, but what it can't, and maybe it will in time, is customer service and being genuine and the nuances of what it is to be human and to feel and have emotions and to care about people and things in a way that you describe, sort of this concierge-like service. I think that's where, especially at the site level, where individuals and employees and associates need to continue to cultivate their ability to go deeper, to listen better, and to execute at a high level with a smile. That's who we're looking for, at every level, frankly.
Folks outside the industry fail to appreciate a lot of what you're saying, which is the importance of this human interaction, or the respect for humanity. When you're operating people's homes, you interface with people at their worst times of their lives. They get divorced, they lose loved ones, they have to get evicted because they've lost their jobs,
they're very vulnerable in that moment. And when humans become vulnerable, it can go one of two ways. As a customer service agent, they can feel as though you're taking advantage of them or not treating them with respect, or if you do the reverse and are kind and empathetic, and as I mentioned, you're a good human to them because they're a human as well, and it's how we should treat each other. It can go a long way. And an eviction, I used to tell my teams all the time, an eviction doesn't have to be a cold process. We have to remember they may have nowhere to go, and so I think if we operate like that as a company, and I know RPM is driven to do that, you can still operate a property and you can procedurally move them out, but you don't have to, for lack of a better way of it, kick them to the curb, right? You can make sure that they transition smoothly and hope for the best for their next transition or their next chapter. So we hope to do a good job of that here at RPM, and that's just one small example of the interactions that we get to have in residents' lives. And I think it's important for us in our culture to never forget or recognize the privilege we have to be in these moments with these residents in some of the most vulnerable times of their lives.
Yeah. I went right to the hard parts that are sometimes not a whole lot of fun. But you're right. There's good moments. We have seen, as I was on the operations side for some time, we saw residents who would come in and celebrate the birth of their children with the community managers, and these marriages, and you share the good moments oftentimes too. So
absolutely, and those are the fun things, right? Those are the exciting things, and ultimately I think that's why we love this business at every level, especially the site level. You get to interact with residents in these exciting moments, and they love to do that. And if you don't, maybe you're not in the right industry. But most of our site team members, they just love that. They're here for the customers. And I think the exciting thing about really this business, and I think there's been a few companies that have been innovative about this, is how do we automate the admin, and how do we focus our employees on what they love to do, and that's take care of people, right? And so it's exciting to see our industry go more towards that, because ultimately I think the residents win in that situation. So we're excited to continue to explore that here at RPM, and I don't want unpack something we just talked about. But ultimately, it's an exciting future ahead, I think, for our business.
The automating the admin part there is really fascinating to me. Is there, but that's probably a show all on its own. Is there, Tony, any in our final minutes here, is there anything else that you think goes into building a great brand? We've talked about residents, we've talked about training, we've talked about recruiting and core values. Is there any other component, I don't know, on the asset side or investor reporting side, anything we haven't talked about that you think is important for people to understand that forms the basis of a great brand?
Well, I would say, and here at RPM, we're locked into this as well. We always have to remember it's not what you say, it's how you made someone feel, right? And I think as a brand, a national brand, that's what we're trying to do every day. So as we sort of use the analogy of our customer service agents going deeper and connecting more with their residents, that's our goal here at RPM, and I think will continue to be our goal as we go forward, to connect deeper from a brand standpoint, and to partner in greater ways with other like-minded suppliers and partners, and ultimately with our clients and others, to go a bit deeper and to really continue to show that we're more than just a brand, that we're a group of people that are dedicated to making positive living experiences for all of our residents, and we're willing to go above and beyond, and at times bend over backwards to do so. So I think that gives depth to a brand, and it gives meaning to it, and of course we have to execute on the operations side. So that's what I would say to a brand that I think people are looking for today, more than ever before.
Yeah, let's remember that your third-party operator, they're humans too.
Yes, we'd like to remind some folks that we are humans as well.
All right. Well, Tony, we wish you best of luck in your new role there. RPM has been growing tremendously. I'm sure you will be a big part of that story in the future. But I really appreciate you coming on and sharing a bit about your philosophy over there with our listeners.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you having us, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us at this week's episode of the Apartment Academy podcast. The Apartment Academy is a production of Leonardo 24/7, the industry's leader in multifamily operations and maintenance software. At Apartment Academy, we realize the hard work that goes into property management and the stress that comes along with it. Leonardo 24/7 takes the guesswork out of your team's day-to-day by providing customized daily guidance on tasks that need to be done, guaranteeing consistent operations across your entire portfolio. To learn more, visit www.leonardo247.com today.